Good morning, everyone. I'm Rick Newberger. I'm co-provost of the Hilltop University Without Walls. My other co is sitting at the table over there, Tom Cummings. We are delighted to have you all here this morning. This is a really interesting program. It is, for those of you who missed part one, this is part two. Part one on vaccines, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That was presented last week at the Senior Geeks Club. Today, we will talk about the social, political aspects of the subject of vaccines, vaccine safety, and I'm promised there's some science in here as well, just in case you're feeling you're getting withdrawal symptoms from last week. Took me a little while to recover from Alan's presentation. So we have two presenters today. Alan Rosenzweig, Dr. Rosenzweig, who's a resident of Hilltop. He presented the original discussion presentation last week. His background is as an immunologist and researcher in I should read it. It would be helpful if I would just read it, right? You have it right here. Yeah, my extremely wonderful ability to memorize things is clearly slipping. We'll talk about that later. Biomedicine. He was at Sloan Kettering, but for 30 years was a researcher and a faculty member at Wayne State University in Detroit. And he moved to Hilltop here in 23. He is quote unquote retired, and don't believe it. Our other guest comes to us from Boulder, Dr. Michael Gaeta. He has something called the Gaeta Institute, which is actually pretty well known. He is a, all right, I'm going to put glasses on, okay? I surrender. I did this from the website, so if it's not correct, blame your webmaster. He's an educator, a clinician, and a writer in the field of natural health. And his purpose is to upgrade patient care and practice success in natural healing profession in order to co-create a world of vital, resilient people who find fulfillment by boldly making their positive contributions and to choose a lifestyle of, this is the point of this whole paragraph, nature first, drugs last. So we're very, very, very pleased to have our two presenters today. The format of today will be roughly the following. I'm not sure that these two gentlemen can be really controlled. So here's the idea. First, Dr. Rosenzweig, Alan will present. I think he might backtrack a little bit from last week on the subject and the science of vaccines and immunology. Then Dr. Gaeta will present. Then, if they so choose, they will have an opportunity to ask each other questions. And then we'll open it to the floor. So, thank you for coming, and please welcome our distinguished guests.
Okay, let's see. All right, does everybody hear me? Here. All right, still hear me? Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to assume that most of the people that are here were the previous talk last week, but even if you weren't, I think you'll be able to plug in and understand what I'm talking about here. Last week, I tried to leave opinions out. I don't know how successful I was, but I started with just the facts. So I laid out the what's known about at least 30,000-foot view of the science behind vaccines and immunology. Now, I I left out lots and lots of material. So if you were to look, so if you knew, talk to somebody, there are a lot of things that I left out, but that was unavoidable. I tried to just give you a overview, but again, realize that I didn't mention lots of things, and there are a lot of loose ends there that if you pulled, the things could unravel, but I can't do a whole course in 2 hours. Actually, more than a course, several courses. At any rate, today we're going to be talking about vaccine safety. And at the end of the lecture last time, I kind of brought the talk to what happens when you have side effects from vaccine. This time, I'm going to start there. There are 1 or 2 slides that more or less that I had used last time, so you may recognize those slides. But again, you didn't have to be at the lecture to pick this up. I think this time we're going to have a little more opinion, and so I'll be a bit more opinionated than I was last time, but not really opinionated. Okay. Vaccines. Why is this not going? Okay, this is where we start, is that no pharmaceutical, including vaccines, can be shown to be absolutely 100% safe for all individuals. There can be serious side effects from vaccination. There are risks, and sometimes that gets lost with people who are telling you have to be vaccinated, but the point is you have to put all of this into perspective. So opinion, when physicians and everybody else fail to mention side effects, then people think that they've been conned or something. There are side effects, and they have to be addressed and talked about. Okay. When the government approved vaccines are promoted as safe and effective, what does safe and effective mean? When the vaccines are promoted as safe and effective, it means that the benefits to the population as a whole outweigh the risks to the population taken as a whole. That's important. You always hear that the vaccine is safe and effective, but nobody explains what that really means. It does not mean that absolutely all individuals within the population will benefit from the vaccine, nor does it mean that absolutely no individual will be injured by the vaccine. So vaccine approval is essentially a risk-benefit, and I put estimation. You can't calculate that completely. For those unfortunate individuals who are injured by a vaccine, the government has provided mechanisms for financial compensation. I'm going to talk about that. So the issue of vaccine safety revolves around side effects from the vaccine. Statistically significant side effects from approved vaccines are rare, but when they do occur, they often involve similar inflammatory or autoimmune disease that occur as a result of natural infection from the pathogen that the vaccine has designed to target. And I think that's important. Most of the really bad side effects from vaccinations are exactly the same as the side effect that you get from the infection itself. And I'll bring this up. So specifically, if you think of COVID, the side effects of COVID, for instance, long COVID, if you look at the papers, the long COVID side effects are pretty much the same that a lot of people are claiming that they get from vaccination. And that's actually important to keep in mind. Okay, so what's going on? So COVID. So COVID is thought to trigger various autoimmune diseases in a small number of infected individuals. I mentioned this whole process last time, molecular mimicry. So what happens if you have a COVID virus, the virus stimulates the immune system to make antibodies against the virus. And these antibodies can then, because the antigens on the virus are similar to antigens on self, it breaks what's called self-tolerance. And these antibodies that are produced not only interact with the virus, but they interact with nerve cells, they interact with red blood cells, they interact with muscle cells, and so you get what's called autoimmune COVID-19 associated autoimmune disease. Now, I talked last time when you get these different, it's not just the antibodies, you get B cells and plasma cells that produce these antibodies, and the point is that once tolerance is broken, these reactive cells remain after the original infection is eliminated. So you don't have the infection anymore, but you still have all these problems. That's what long COVID is about. And the point is that not everybody that gets COVID, most of us in this room, I suspect, have been infected with COVID, but not everybody gets long COVID. So the question, one of the questions, why do some people get long COVID and most people don't? That's not quite known, and I'll talk about that in a second. All right, so the same thing happens with people who have never been infected with COVID, but they take a COVID vaccine. The idea is instead of the virus stimulating the immune system, just a artificial viral particle is, an artificial viral particle is responsible for stimulating the immune system. So the whole point of the vaccine antigen is it looks like the natural antigen. But because it looks like the natural antigen, it produces antibodies that recognize the virus. But at the same time, it does the same thing with producing antibodies and B cells that produce those antibodies that lead to the vaccine-associated autoimmune disease. That's why the vaccine-associated autoimmune disease in COVID-19 is very similar to long COVID. So if you look at the papers that are coming out, Guillain-Barré syndrome is one of the problems with long COVID. It's one of the problems with people who have side effects from the vaccine alone, and it makes sense. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind, that the vaccines are really just pieces of the original virus, or like pieces of the original virus, so they're not something different. So the fact that if you're going to get a bad response from the virus, you can get the same bad response from the vaccine. But the point is that most people don't have these side effects. We're talking about a small minority. So I don't know what the numbers are, but the numbers are certainly less than 0.1% or even less than that. There were, I'm trying to remember the statistics. I think the statistics of long COVID actually at the very beginning were actually quite high. I don't believe that the numbers that I saw were 10% long COVID, and people who have been immunized against COVID, it goes down to 3%. I think that's probably a little high, but I can't comment on that. But that's what the numbers are that are circulating in the literature. Okay, so here's the point, and this was a slide I had last time. Generally, understanding vaccine side effects is difficult, but it's part of a much larger problem. So the problem is really autoimmune disease or chronic autoimmune disease. So think of lupus or arthritis. These are autoimmune diseases. And in the US, 8% of the US population suffers from chronic autoimmune disease. It's an estimate. 80% of whom are female. Exactly why, nobody really knows. But the point is that what generates autoimmune disease is the interaction of genetics, as I said, sex, dietary components, toxic chemicals in the environment, water that you drink, air that you breathe. Recently, all that smoke that we had from the fires, that comes in here as well. particles, metals, heavy metals that come, titanium or whatever, from steel plants, steel production. And it depends where you live. You get a different toxic soup. So if you live in downtown Detroit, you get a different toxic soup than you live in, where we live in Colorado now. Also, the gut microbiome, those are the, what they call, quote, good bacteria. I mean, we have in our systems lots of bacteria, and they're actually necessary. But depending on the makeup, it affects the probability of autoimmune disease. Also, infections. So when we talk about and vaccines, so vaccines fit into this as well. So all of these things interact simultaneously. And not only that, it's the history of all of these interactions. So if you had a infection of a particular pathogen, for instance, Epstein-Barr virus is now one of the major things that people are looking at. Turns out that that may be important later. COVID may activate Epstein-Barr virus, and COVID vaccinations may activate Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus has now been connected with multiple sclerosis. Now, most of us have Epstein, 90% of us in this room probably have Epstein-Barr virus. Point is, once you get it, it stays with you. Some viruses never disappear. Epstein-Barr virus is one of them. So the whole point is all of these factors interact simultaneously, and the history of the exposures interact. So this is a very complicated problem. Side effects from vaccines are just one aspect of this. So if you really want to understand why vaccines or the safety of vaccines, you really have to understand a lot more. So a vaccine may be a problem for some individual if they have a certain dietary component, or a certain dietary component may protect you from vaccine autoimmune diseases. For instance, omega-3 fatty acids tend to protect people from inflammatory autoimmune disease. I say tend to, it's not clear why or how. That's one of the things that I worked on. But I don't have all the answers, and nobody has all the answers. But this is what the state of research is now. Again, so vaccine, I just want to point out, is part of a much larger problem. Okay, yeah. So where do you go if you think that you've been injured by a vaccine? Okay, for medical advice, you go to your primary care physician. You don't go to the internet, you go to the primary care physician. So I think that's sort of self-obvious. Now, where do you go for financial compensation if you think you've been injured by a vaccine? Well, it depends. Is the vaccine covered by something called the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program, CICP? If the answer is yes, you go to the Department of Health Injury Compensation Program. The Countermeasures Compensation Program is administered by the Department of Health, U.S. Department of Health, since fiscal year 2010, and it has provided compensation for injuries that occur as a result of the administration use of certain countermeasures. Compensation may include medical expenses that are not covered, lost employment income, and survivor benefit. Countermeasure is a vaccine, medication, device, or other item that is used to prevent, diagnose, treat a public health emergency or security threat. COVID-19 vaccinations are covered by this program. I don't think they should be, and well, I'll tell you why, but they are. So if you think you have a side effect, serious side effect from COVID-19 inoculation, this is where you have to go.
Question?
Question?
Yeah. As a physician, I was required to report all side effects of vaccines. So it's really important that you do go to your primary care physician so it can be reported. That's the only way they can keep up with statistics on how many people have problems, is to go to a primary care. Don't ignore it, don't just go to the internet, but go to your primary care physician. It's almost like a mandatory reporting of any side effect.
Right, and that's what I said, you go to your physician first, and it turns out you actually have to submit a request, and that request is going to include information from your care providers. So without that information, it gets rejected. At any rate, once you submit the request, it goes through a review by the medical staff, and then they make a decision, and if they say they think you deserve compensation, you get a payment. If they decide no, all you can do is ask them to reconsider, but if they still say no, that's it. That's the end of the game.
It's not about compensation, it's just about reporting of the side effect.
Yes, I understand. Yeah, that's why I said that you go to the physician first.
I didn't deal with compensation.
Right, the physician act, well, if somebody needed to submit this, they would ask you to fill out the paperwork that is involved. So the treating physician needs to fill out paperwork to complete this request.
Never had to do that.
Well, I know you have probably.
4 years I never had to do that.
Well, that's because most people don't know about this program. And they don't know about the other program either, which I'll get to. Okay, so these are some of the agents that are covered by the countermeasures program. COVID-19 is one of them.
Follow-up question. If I remember correctly, I signed my life away when I took the COVID shots that basically said it was an experimental drug and nobody's responsible. Anything that happens is my problem.
Well, what I'm telling you is not quite, because you still have the option to go to this federal program, and they have the ability to compensate you. What you don't have is the option to sue anywhere in court, but you do have the option to go to this administrative program. Okay? So you didn't quite sign everything away, but you do have the option to go to this. This is an administrative program. Okay. And these are some of the data. So pending, so they've had pending review since it was created, 10,000. This is a little disconcerting. They've only compensated 50 people, 50 claims, which ain't much. They've denied for about 4,000, and problem here is a lot of the claims are denied because people don't have the benefit packages put together properly. So if your benefit package is missing something, they just deny the claim. So that's the reason that a lot of these, the point is, this is really low. But again, this is now this program is now under the direct control of Secretary Kennedy. So this is going to be interesting. So he has direct control of this now. Okay, so suppose the answer is no. Where do you go? Well, you go to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims Office of the Special Masters, which in the business is called the Vaccine Court. Okay, so the Office of Special Masters is an office within the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. So this is not within the executive branch of the government. This is within the court branch of the third branch of government. This is in the courts. And it was created by the Vaccine Act of wherever it was. Special masters are appointed by a majority vote of the judges of the court. Special masters, I think there are 8 special masters. They serve 4-year terms, and upon the expiration of the term, they may be reappointed by the court. Okay, so the Office of Special Masters is the hierarchy. The Office of Special Masters is part of the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. There are 16 judges on this court. They are like any other federal judges. They're appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and it's a lifetime appointment. So this is just like a district court. But if you have any claim against the federal government, it doesn't go to a district court. It goes to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, and in this case, they have an Office of Special Master. The U.S. Court of Federal Claims is under the control of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. This is the appeals court, and of course they are under the control of the Supreme Court. So, if you don't agree with this, the decision here, you can appeal to these guys. You don't agree with that, you appeal here, and ultimately you can appeal to the Supreme Court. If you don't have that option in the other program, that's an administrative program. This is within the court system. You have all of these options for appeal. Okay, so you go to the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, Vaccine Court, Special Master is assigned to the case, and then the next question is the vaccine injury listed on the vaccine table? What's the vaccine table? Well, the vaccine table is a list that's been approved of vaccines and particular side effects and the term, how long you've been exposed. So for instance, all vaccines containing whole cell pertussis bacteria, these are the injuries that this table agrees is possible. Anaphylaxis, encephaly, shoulder injury, or vasovagal syncope.
Syncope, vasovagal syncope.
Syncope, okay. Now, each one has a time limit, so this has to be, you have to have the symptoms in less than 4 hours. Here, 72 hours, here 48 hours, and 1 hour. And this is how it goes. Here, so this is the last vaccine. This vaccine table gets updated periodically. So MMR vaccine is here, and here are all the side effects and the time limits. Polio vaccine, it's there. And what I wanted to put out, especially now, is seasonal influenza. This just got added to the table within the last year. And in particular is Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a serious autoimmune problem with systemic nerves. And so you have mobility problems. It's not central nervous system, but peripheral nerves that are destroyed. They're demyelinated. You have autoimmune processes that destroy the insulation on nerves. Actually, most of the cases now that are in this court are associated with Guillain-Barré syndrome. People have been submitting claims for years and were denied. They just put this on, and this is going to be a big deal because Guillain-Barré syndrome is a recognized side effect of seasonal influenza vaccinations. Okay, now, if the special master accepts the case for trial, again, the plaintiff's attorney fees are covered by the court. So you don't pay attorney fees. On the other hand, the attorneys, that's all they get. They don't get a bit of the settlement. They submit their fees, and the court pays their fees. The plaintiff's expert witness fees are covered by the court. So you're going to need expert witnesses. Those fees are covered by the court. The Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services is the defendant of record. So if you're the plaintiff, you are, in essence, suing the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So if you go to this court now, you're going to be suing Robert Kennedy for injuries from a vaccine, and that's going to be interesting. Okay, the Secretary is represented by attorneys who are members of the Department of Justice, so that's his attorneys. Now the guys, these attorneys, that's all they do is they work in this vaccine court, but they are employees of the Department of Justice. There will be a non-jury trial. The special master will hear the evidence, decide the case, and if the plaintiff is successful, the special master will decide on compensation to the plaintiff. So it's a non-jury trial. At any time before judgment, there may be a negotiated settlement between the government and the plaintiff. And that actually occurs about 60% of the time in this court. So, just going in, you've got a 60% chance of getting compensated if the special master accepts. Now, if the vaccine is on the list, there is no trial at all. I forgot to mention that. It doesn't go to trial. The special master will say, okay, I'm going to decide what your compensation is, and then give you a decision. Say you know this injury is $150,000. This is what we're going to pay you, and that's about the looking at the numbers. That's about what the average settlement is. It's over $100,000 per incident. The special master's decision will be guided by what's called the Olfen decision. That was a decision by the Court of Appeals. Now, in 2005, a person had, I think, a problem with a particular vaccine. It may have been tetanus toxin, but I'm not sure. The special master ruled against them. They appealed to the court. The court overruled the special master, but then the government appealed to the appeals court. The appeals court supported the finding, and again overruled the special master, but at the time it issued essentially what can be considered case law that the special masters now have to follow when they're deciding the case. So the court formulated a three-pronged prima facie case for a petitioner who needs to prove causation, in fact, in an off-table vaccine case. The petitioner's burden is to show by preponderant evidence that the vaccination brought about injury by providing, one, a medical theory causally connecting the vaccination and the injury. Two, a logical sequence of cause and effect showing the vaccination was the reason for the injury. And three, a showing approximate temporal relationship between the vaccination and injury. So you need a plausible medical theory. So if you come in, well, I got vaccinated when Jupiter was in the house of Aquarius and I happened to be a Gemini, well, that's not a plausible scientific, so you can lose right away. And you need a logical sequence showing that, and you need to show a proximal temporal relationship. So if you were vaccinated 20 years ago and suddenly you have multiple sclerosis, well, not likely that the vaccination had anything to do with that. So you need to have some sort of temporal relationship and injury that makes sense. Now, they also said if the petitioner satisfies the prongs, then they are entitled to recover unless the government shows also by a preponderance evidence that the injury was in fact caused by factors unrelated to the vaccine. So to give you a simple example, you had a vaccination, you end up with a broken arm, and you have some reasonable theory why the vaccination could lead to the broken arm, but then the government says, hey, we have records that you went to the emergency room because you fell. It's much more likely that the fall broke your arm than the vaccine did. So you would lose the case based on that. So that gives you a, but the appeals court also stated that the purpose of the Vaccines Act, preponderance standard, is to allow the finding of causation in the field, benefit of complete and direct proof of how the vaccines affect the body. That's important because we don't know much about how vaccines affect the body. So if you had to actually show that, you'd never win. But they pointed that out. In the Athens decision, the appeals court also stated that the Congress envisioned in the Vaccine Act that, quote, the close calls regarding causation are resolved in favor of the injured claimants. So actually, when you actually have a leg up on the government when you go into these cases. Problem is most people don't know about this vaccine court. So here are some of the injury compensation statistics. These are the number from 2020 to 2025. These are the number of cases that were filed, and these are the number of awards that they compensated. So in 2024, they awarded 1,200 awards. Most of these actually are for the influenza vaccine. When you look at, I didn't put all the numbers there. Compare that to 50. So, and this is the amount of money that petitioners were awarded. So they were awarded $149,653,390. So it's the hundreds of millions that this court is awarding. So it's a lot of money, and most people don't even know about this. Now, again, you're suing the Robert Kennedy now when you go here. He can settle the case anytime he wants. So this is going to be a problem for Kennedy, because people with vaccine injuries are coming and asking for a lot of money, and I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, got it. Finish up. Okay, I just wanted to quickly, quickly talk about the differences in the CCIP and the vaccine court. So these are that's not important. Well, I'll go back. These are the covered countermeasures, and it's up to the Secretary of Health to determine what's covered. Here, it's a little more indirect, but again, mostly the Secretary of Health determines the coverage. The money is paid by the federal excise tax on vaccines. Here, it's covered by a direct congressional appropriation. So there's a lot of money here. This covers serious injuries and deaths. This is injuries lasting more than 6 months. They're more or less the same. But this is important. For this program, it's an administrative HHS decision. Here, it's a court decision. Very different. Here, you have no appeal possible. Here, you can appeal up to the Supreme Court, if you like, if it goes against you. That's an important difference. That's the end of the lecture. Just there. So I guess at this point, if anybody has any questions.
We'll get the questions after. Let's
Okay.
get to Dr. Gaeta.
Thank you, Alan. That was great. Thank you. I learned a lot about the whole process. So that was excellent. I appreciate that. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Gaeta. I've been practicing Chinese and functional medicine in a family practice for the last 35 years. And these days, I just practice part-time on Tuesdays, seeing patients in the office and virtually. And my full-time job is training other practitioners of different disciplines, physicians, chiropractors, naturopaths, acupuncturists, nutritionists in natural functional medicine. So I'm more on the natural side of helping people get well and stay well. And I've trained a little over 20,000 practitioners over the last 32 years of teaching. So my full-time job these days is teaching. Used to be full-time practice. I grew up in New York City, and we had, oh, there you go. Whereabouts? Brooklyn, okay, yeah, I worked in Brooklyn as a church organist for 7 years, and grew up in Queens, and then moved out to Colorado about 15 years ago. So yeah, I've been seeing many thousands of patients over the years, trained tens of thousands of practitioners, and the questions I keep getting from patients over the years, especially parents who have kids or about to have kids, is about this vaccine question. And understandable choice. I had to make the same decision with my wife when we had our, at the time when we had our 2 kids. And really, where I don't really tell patients what to do either way in terms of this important decision. I do encourage them though to get informed and to make an informed decision. And I taught medical ethics for over the course of 26 years in the U.S. and Canada. And so bioethics is very important to me, and the kind of central principle of medical ethics, which goes back to the Nuremberg doctors' trials in 1947, is this principle of informed consent, which means you need to be fully informed of what the intended benefits are of the treatment and of all possible side effects of that treatment that might arise, however rare or common. And then you're allowed free, voluntary, uncoerced, your decision, do what makes sense to you, consent. Unfortunately, this has not really existed in the United States related to vaccines for some number of decades. And so we really haven't had informed consent in actual practice, which is a real kind of ethical problem. So my whole approach to this is I don't tell patients what to do, related to any medication, but I just give them information and encourage them to make an informed decision. So that's sort of my approach to this. And if they ask me, I'll let them know. I have two unusually healthy, completely unvaccinated kids, and here's why. My wife and I, she was still is an employment litigation attorney, super well educated and a real expert at research, legal research and other research, to do her job as an employment attorney. And so the two of us really hit the books when she was pregnant. We wanted to make an informed decision about vaccines, and we both, and her sister is a pediatrician, was head of Children's Health in the state of Iowa. Her other sister is a pharmacologist. Her brother is a neurosurgeon. Her brother-in-law is a radiologist. She came from a very medical family and was initially predisposed towards whatever the medical system said to do. But she's an independent thinking person. So, well, let me find out for myself. And we both kind of went at it. And I started my first, I kind of got interested in this subject when I first saw my first vaccine-injured patient, child. This was probably, I've been practicing 35 years, so this was probably about 33 years ago when a mom brought in her kid who had neurodevelopmental delays and eczema and asthma, ear infections, digestive issues. And I just, I got all my shots when I was a kid. I'm 55, I was born in 1969, got all my shots, which at that time was 5 or 6, last time from memory of my vaccine record I got from my mom. Today, up until recently, it was 72. That kids get 72 vaccines today. And the latest changes that just happened brings that number up to 79. So that's all, easily. You just look at the CDC website, they give you a chart, and you can see this is what we recommend kids get. And you might say, well, why did that change? So why did the number of vaccines that are recommended increase so much? Well, something happened in 1986 where Wyeth, which was now today Pfizer, there was a court case that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court determined that vaccines were unavoidably unsafe, but that there was some public health benefit. So the vaccine manufacturers, the drug companies that make vaccines, were losing $20 in downstream liability from lawsuits for every dollar of income, the revenues they made from vaccines. So they said, we're getting out of the business here. We're losing $20 for every dollar we make. So we're getting out of the vaccine manufacturing business. And so the result of that was 1986, rather than have vaccine makers make safe vaccines, they were given blanket liability, which led to this, and thank you again for this very detailed explanation of how vaccine injuries are handled. And that was, so the vaccine makers, as of 1986, were no longer liable for any injuries caused by their products. This is not true really of any other product of any kind. Like if you have a car with defective brakes and you get in a car crash and it was shown to have defective brakes, the liability, Toyota or Ford or whoever is liable for that injury. But in this case, vaccine makers kind of get a free pass. So starting in 1989, the number of vaccines added to the childhood schedule just exploded. Why? Because the vaccine makers could release new vaccines, new products, that the government would essentially mandate without any concern for liability. In other words, if they injured somebody, it didn't matter then. The government, and you saw the statistics here, thank you again, the government was like taxpayers, which, the government doesn't pay anything to taxpayers. You and I pay this thing. You and I were paying on these vaccine injuries instead of the makers of the vaccine. And so that, created this bonanza of this never-ending increase in new vaccines added to the schedule by the VICP, the Vaccine Injury, not VICP, ACIP, the Advisory Council on Immunization Practices, which is a bunch of physicians and scientists, 90% of which have financial ties to the drug companies that make vaccines. So, we've seen this real pernicious, what's called agency capture, where FDA basically works for the drug companies, so more than 50% of their budget comes from drug companies. CDC, same thing. We have this revolving door between industry and government, where we really can't trust that these doctors are making recommendations based on what's best for the public, as compared to the drug companies that they have financial ties to. So this has been a real issue. So when I get asked by parents, well, what should I do? The questions they ask usually have to do with one of three things. One is, are the vaccines safe? The second is, are the vaccines effective? And the third is, are the vaccines necessary? These are the questions I've been getting for 35 years from parents, typically. More recently related to COVID shots. That's a very different story, because they're not actually vaccines. Typically the mRNA shots are not actually vaccines the way we have thought of them. So when it comes to safety, the CDC in 2010 commissioned one of the most prestigious medical consultancies in the world, the Harvard Pilgrim Consulting Group, and they contracted with this group to improve the vaccine adverse events reporting system called VAERS. And VAERS is the system where vaccine issues are reported. And all of my students who are physicians have told me the same thing. Just as this doctor, thank you for that, that they're supposed to report vaccine injuries. They make it so hard to do that. My students said, at best, if I can fly through that form at light speed, it takes me a half hour. Typically, it's 1 to 4 hours to complete the form. This is just what I've been told by my functional medicine students who are physicians. They said, it looks like they make it really hard for us to file these adverse event reports, and they do. And so back in 2010, CDC said, yeah, let's make this thing better. And the usual claim is that vaccine injuries are 1 in a million. And you might have heard that in the news and so forth. And remember, in mainstream media, 60 to 70% of their annual revenues come from drug ads. So you have to at least have a grain of salt with anything you hear about vaccines or pharmaceuticals in general in the mainstream media. So whether it's a newspaper or magazine or television or whatever, just keep in the back of your head that 60 to 70% of their total revenues come from pharma ads. So drug ads are illegal in the whole planet, except 2 countries, the US and New Zealand. So there's a perverse incentive to not bite the hand that feeds you if you're, whoever, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, USA Today, whatever, doesn't really matter. Mainstream media outlets that put ads on their platform, they're receiving an enormous amount of revenue, billions of dollars every year from drug companies. So the purpose of those ads is not to sell you a drug. The purpose of those ads is to control the narrative around pharmaceutical products, including vaccines. That's why you'll see very, very few bad stories or reporting that isn't favorable to pharma drugs and vaccines. So that's a huge issue. So what we're told in mainstream, it has really very little relationship to the reality of the situation. An example of that is this study, Harvard Pilgrim study, 2010, CDC said, hey, let's make theirs better. And the initial report came back and said, you know, we've looked at the data extensively. This is a very prestigious consultancy that's world famous, you know, very well regarded. And they found, well, first of all, adverse events from vaccines aren't 1 in a million, they're 1 in 334. So if we have 78 million kids receiving 72 vaccines, now again, that's individual vaccines. Many of these shots are given a combination. So MMR, DTaP, and so forth. They're given several in one shot. So if you count them separately, not injections, but total vaccines, often in combinations, you end up with the current number of 79, which just happened a couple months ago, and before that, for many years, it was about 72. So now we have a situation where, you know, we started with this idea of informed consent. People aren't being informed, right? I didn't realize we had a slide deck available. I have an 8-hour presentation on this with hundreds of slides. But I'm happy to do without, it's fine. I spoke on this subject to a group of health professionals in Austin, Texas, some years ago. And on the first break, so the morning break, a man came up to me and said, I just want to introduce myself. I've been a pediatrician for 25 years. I'm like, oh, here we go. Let's have a discussion. And he said, I want to tell you 2 things. The first thing is that I agree with everything you said. That right there was a bit of a surprise. The second thing, he said, I want you to know 2 things. That was the first thing, I agree with everything you said. Second is, you should know that, again, I've been doing this for a quarter century, that 70 to 80% of a pediatrician's practice income comes from vaccines. So the revenue model in pediatric practice is mostly based on vaccinating. And he said that's why you won't hear my colleagues in pediatrics question the vaccines are safe, effective, and necessary message or narrative or story that you hear from the government and on the mainstream media and from public health authorities. Vaccines are safe, effective, and necessary, and you're not going to hear us question that, and that may be possibly why. So I was happy to hear that from a pediatrician. So the vaccine story gets complicated when you realize the massive conflicts of interest there are at every level. So we have agency capture in FDA and CDC, we have media capture from pharma dollars, and we have pediatric capture, so in a way, from the fact that these well baby visits are not well baby visits, they're vaccine visits. And I was speaking on a panel similar to this some years ago at a medical convention, and the person to my right was also an immunologist who was a professor at some of the local universities teaching immunology. And I had said in my talk in the morning that it's really kind of doesn't make sense immunologically to give vaccines to babies. Now remember, what is a vaccine? A vaccine is a drug that is designed to temporarily stimulate antibody production to a synthetic version of the pathogen. It's not quite what occurs in nature. It's something similar kind of to it. And we rely on what the doctor explained was molecular mimicry and cross-reactivity, that the antibodies to those not quite the same. So measles, for example. What's in the measles vaccine is not measles. It's a version of the measles that doesn't occur in nature. And you'll get a temporary, typically 2 to 3 years, of antibody stimulation to that injection. And so I said, it really doesn't make sense. Why are we vaccinating babies with 24 vaccines in the first year of life when they can't make antibodies? They don't really make antibodies. They don't have a humoral or acquired or adaptive immune system until somewhere between age 1 and 2. Like, this doesn't make sense. Why are we vaccinating babies who can't make antibodies with drugs that only stimulate antibody production? So one of the doctors stood up and asked the immunologist that, who's like super pro vaccine, did her postgraduate fellowship at Yale developing new vaccines, super pro vaccine. She said, oh, that's totally true. She said, we only give vaccines at the well baby visits to encourage compliance. She said, if we don't give vaccines, they probably won't come in for the well baby visit. So she said, in her words, she said it's more of a training thing. We're training parents to bring their kid in at 2 months, 4 months, and 6 months with the vaccines to train them. Otherwise, they may not come in for that well baby visit to measure the head and put the baby on a scale and measure them, do all the things that's wrapped around the vaccine visit. So she even spoke to a vaccine nurse who was in charge of vaccines in a local county. And she said, oh, I'm going to speak at this medical conference about vaccines. She said, oh, make sure you tell them they have to do the 1-year vaccines because all the ones before that don't work. And the immunologist said, yeah, I know. So anyway, this is all in this theme of informed consent. I don't believe that, I think parents and individuals should make informed, uncoerced decisions. And with the information we're actually being given is so corrupt at so many levels, from the government agencies to the media to the pediatric practices, there's no informed consent. Nobody's being told the possibilities of adverse effects. Vaccines are safe, effective, and necessary. And here's the problem. Teaching medical ethics for 26 years, I have real problems when questions are not allowed, right? When you can't even ask a question, right? Huge numbers of red flags go up in my consciousness. If a parent asks a question of a physician or whoever about a pharmaceutical product, they should get an answer. They shouldn't be, derided and criticized for asking questions. But we've seen this in COVID, if you question the COVID narrative, and I think people's awareness of this subject has gone up because of COVID, because the government literally got every single thing wrong. Johns Hopkins came out with a huge, kind of one of the many definitive studies on this, that all the COVID measures did more harm than good. Distancing, more harm than good. Masks, way more harm than good. The experimental injections, way more harm than good. But if you even ask questions, you were, considered an outcast, somebody who was anti-science or something like this. So I think it's very important that, and science is asking questions. The basis of science is asking questions, and there is no such thing ever, and I'm sure my scientist colleague here would agree, there's no such thing as settled science. Science is ongoing inquiry. And the way good science happens is with debate. And so when debate gets shut down, either in the pediatrician's office or in the COVID realm, that's a problem. Science gets better, it evolves when there's vigorous debate and challenge. That's how it was done forever, until more recently, where you're not allowed to ask questions, you're not allowed to think for yourself, you just have to do what you're told, or you're a bad parent because you're endangering other kids and all this kind of stuff. So I'm concerned about this because I'm very committed to ethical medical practice and the principle of informed, uncoerced consent. And it's just, I've treated so many kids and parents, there's just a lot of coercion going on. And now I understand a little bit more after speaking with that pediatrician as to why that is happening. So let's see, just a couple of other points, because you brought up so many good things, I appreciate that. The mRNA injections for COVID are not really vaccines, as we've thought of them. A vaccine traditionally, until that time, was a teeny amount of an antigen, which is basically a protein that sort of resembles the pathogen, but there's too little of it to create an immune response. And usually that little tiny bit of protein is combined with what's called an adjuvant. An adjuvant is usually something, and they use cheap stuff like aluminum hydroxide to amplify. There's an immunological term called danger. The danger state in the immune system is a state of high reactivity and high stimulation. And you need that aluminum which is a very potent toxin, to ramp up and amplify the immune response to that teeny bit of thing. The problem is when you add a lot of these adjuvants together in a visit, so 3 vaccine shots, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, in a visit, the cumulative bolus or big bunch of aluminum that you get in that visit exceeds what the government considers safe by a factor of 50. And this is another problem with vaccine research, is we don't have any good vaccine safety studies. The vaccine safety studies typically last a few days before the pre-licensure vaccine safety studies will last anywhere from 2 to 5 to 7 days. That's a problem. And they're not compared to a true placebo. I appreciate you bringing that up. A true inner placebo, like a saline injection. The placebo is another vaccine, or the vaccine adjuvant, like aluminum. So we don't have good safety studies at all on vaccines. And the absence of good safety science, good safety data, doesn't mean it's safe. It just means you don't know. So we're taking a big risk with 78 million American children on products that have really crappy safety data behind them. And that study that the CDC commissioned in 2010, it's called the Lazarus Report. You can look it up and see the actual report. It's readily available online. And I would suggest a website to you, openvaers.com. O-P-E-N, VAERS, V-A-E-R-S.com. And I'm happy to give my contact info to folks if you want to learn, happy to send you all this stuff. And we have a free course called Vaccines and Choice, which you're welcome to view as free course that we put out. But what did they find? According to the CDC report, less than 1% of vaccine adverse reactions are reported. Let me say that again. According to the government, the CDC report, less than 1% of adverse reactions are even reported. Why? And you brought out a great point. Nobody knows that they can make a report. And for our wonderful medical doctors who are supposed to report these things, they make it really difficult. So we have a massive underreport. Anybody can file a report. People don't know that the system exists. And then they make it super hard to file a report, especially for a physician. So we have an underreporting of vaccine injuries by at least a factor of 100, if less than 1% are actually getting reported. That concerns me. And what my opinion is, and I'll just give me data, my opinion is, and this is very consistent with many students and colleagues in the medical profession, is that the vaccine schedule does much more harm than good. I think we've traded some measles cases, and remember, mortality, death was the concern with any issue. If you get sick and you get better, great. If you die, that's the problem, right? So we're much more concerned about cases. Cases get in, there's 8 measles cases, so what? The mortality from measles declined 99.48%. Deaths from measles in the year before the measles vaccine was introduced in 1963. So measles vaccine came out in 1963. Mortality, death from measles declined almost 100%, at least 99% before the vaccine was even available. So it definitely declined the cases. Basically every kid in the country got, you remember, everybody got the measles back in the day. Everybody remember that? Measles just got me. It was on the Brady Bunch. Right? Oh, Marcia's got the measles, ha ha ha. Oh, maybe I'm gonna. It was just a big joke. It was like, just daily life. Like you should get chickenpox. I got chickenpox. This is a 1-week rash. And the death rate, which is what we're concerned about, with every vaccine, declined by typically 90% or more before the vaccine was even available. So that, is, so I think we have a situation with our vaccine program of bad science, corrupt science, and overstated benefits and understated risks, so that people can't really make an informed decision. Pfizer hid hundreds of deaths from their COVID vaccine and hid it. They didn't tell anybody about it. Oh yeah, perfectly safe, go ahead. Hundreds of people died in the trial. They just didn't say anything about it. They just buried the bodies, so to speak. And this happens all the time, when you rely on the drug company to provide safety data. So let me just say, and what we call long COVID is usually long vax. Almost all the cases of long COVID and people were vaccinated. The vaccine never prevented COVID, never prevented transmission, never prevented infection, and it's been a catastrophic failure. There was a conference on this in Romania recently. COVID shots conservatively, in this medical conference, they looked at the data, have killed at least 17 million people worldwide from the vaccine, not COVID. COVID, was not, as one physician called it, an intern, it's a nothing burger for most people. We've all been exposed, and most cases were asymptomatic or mild, and people who did die from COVID had an average of 4 serious diseases: diabetes, cardiovascular disease, other conditions. So the COVID vaccines have proven to be way more dangerous than COVID itself, and most of those with so-called long COVID actually have long vax. Yale University just came out with a major study last week confirming that the spike protein production persists for at least 702 days. We were told the body would stop making the spike after 48 hours. It's 2 years, and it's still going. So again, these are genetic manipulation drugs, they're not vaccines. They work in a very different mechanism, and it makes autoimmunity very likely. And the reason for that, just to finish the COVID thing, is any cell in the body that produces a foreign protein that doesn't belong in the body is immediately targeted by the immune system. This isn't an option. This is just how the immune system works. And it happens with viruses. If you've got a viral infection, the virus takes over a cell, starts copying itself. Those viral proteins leak out of the cell into the bloodstream or to the extracellular space. The immune system is like, whoa, you're making something that doesn't belong here. And we'll go target that cell to help you not get sick from that virus. Same thing happens with mRNA injections. This is not a solvable problem. You can't solve this. This is just what happens. If you force healthy cells to make foreign proteins, they will be targeted by the immune system. And the problem is the spike protein is what we call antigenically similar to at least 28 different cell types in the body. So the likelihood of autoimmune disease is enormous. And half of the COVID vaccine deaths happen within the first 48 hours. And the others are much more delayed. By the way, we have, in the history of VAERS, 30 years of VAERS reports on 88 vaccines, COVID shots, and again, underreported massively. COVID shots have killed, according to the government's vaccine adverse reporting system, COVID shots have killed 1,000 times more people than 88 other vaccines tracked over 30 years. They've been catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic. And they still keep recommending them. If you're following the CDC schedule, you've gotten 8 COVID shots with no chance of preventing infection or transmission, and a massively increased likelihood of dying or developing serious autoimmune disease. And now the oncologists are finding turbo cancers, very aggressive cancers, reoccurring or showing up for the first time in people who've had COVID shots. So I refer you to Open VAERS. There's a lot of data there that you can learn about. Okay. Oh, and I just found out. Looking at the government statistics on, they make it really difficult, as the doctor pointed out, to get compensated for vaccine injury. So as of April, just over 13,000 vaccination compensation claims have been filed with the federal government. Only 12 have been paid out. So that means the very few injuries that result in a claim is about 1%. So you take all the injuries, 1% of those result in a claim, and 0.0009% of those claims get paid out. That's a huge problem. And so, but again, if the vaccine manufacturers are not liable for liability or damages, that's a huge problem. So anyway, those are a few points I wanted to make. Really interested in your thoughts, and we'll have a conversation, ask questions, and we'll do that.
Okay, so I guess we're supposed to talk and then open it to the audience.
Yeah.
I would say that I agree with some of the things that you said, and I disagree strongly with other things.
Sure.
I think that the fact, I agree that the public does not have enough information about vaccines, their benefits, and certainly their risks. That's one of the reasons I agreed to do this talk. And what I've been trying to do is give you information so that you can make informed decisions.
Great.
And that's quite clear, that one of the problems, a major problem, is there's not enough information out. I think even physicians don't have enough information. I mean, I spent a lifetime teaching physicians about immunology, and once they leave medical school, take whatever the course, they're at the risk of drug representatives who come into their office and pushing drugs. So yeah, that's a problem. I think that you're absolutely right. A real problem of all these damn drug commercials. I think drug commercials, bad news, and they should certainly be banned. There's no reason that drug commercials are out there. It's not that they confuse people, I think is what they do. They're selling something, and that's a real problem. I'm not sure how long it started, about 30 years ago or something that they started, because originally drugs were not. Also, it's an economic problem. Most of the money that they pay for advertising gets tacked into the price that they charge for the drugs. That's one of the reasons.
All of it gets put.
All of it, yeah. That's one of the reasons drugs are so damn expensive, is they're not spending the money on research or improvement of the product, they're spending it on advertising. So that you're absolutely correct about that. I think that you're also correct is that adverse effects, there's a problem with physicians are not, it's not physicians' fault, but the data is not there. So it's hard to make informed decisions when the data isn't there. So I agree with you with that. That's quite clear, that there's just not enough data. On the other hand, I think that overall, like I said, when vaccines are approved, it's a risk-benefit decision. And I think benefits for vaccines, most vaccines are clearly outweigh the risk, including COVID. Before there was COVID, if you remember, the morgues were full all over the country. Bodies were being stored in freezer trucks. We don't have that anymore. Now there's more or less. I didn't talk about herd immunity, and herd immunity is what really protects the population. Now, some viruses you can get herd immunity without vaccination. Other viruses you can't, particularly COVID. The reason for that is that it keeps mutating so fast that the strains change. And so it makes it very difficult for herd immunity to come about by natural causes. So people who said, I don't know if you're one of them, but shouldn't have any COVID inoculations at all, that doesn't, you just get herd immunity. That doesn't work for herd immunity, for COVID infection, that virus. May work for other viruses, but not that one. It doesn't work, it didn't work for smallpox. Smallpox is infected humans for 10,000 years. And strain after strain, and millions of people over history were killed. What got rid of smallpox was vaccinations.
Okay.
And no question about that. Now, some people who were inoculated did have problems with smallpox, no question. But overall, risk versus benefit on a population level came out positive for smallpox. Now, you're also right that, I didn't talk about this, that some, not all vaccines, but some vaccines do have adjuvants.
Oh, can we just do the herd immunity thing for a second? Thank you for that. Yeah, so herd immunity was a concept that came out in 1931. There was a government researcher who was tasked with finding out why there were certain declines in Chicago and Baltimore, were two of the cities that he kind of dove into. And what they concluded, it was about measles. Measles was a huge issue 100 years ago. And keep in mind that the reduction in mortality from all of the vaccinated diseases declined almost, I mean, at least 90% before the vaccines were even available. And conditions like scarlet fever, which is a problem. There was a vaccine for scarlet fever, but in the trials, so many people got hurt, they never released it to the public. Scarlet fever went away in the same way that all the other, and tuberculosis, there never a mass tuberculosis vaccine. All those very deadly conditions, for some people, went away without vaccines. In other words, there was never a vaccine in mass produced for scarlet fever or tuberculosis, but it went away in the same way because of natural herd immunity. So here's what happened. 1931, published the paper looking at data in Chicago and Baltimore. And the conclusion was, hey, we just noticed that when at least, and there was, in Chicago and Baltimore, there's different numbers. When there's at least 59, and the other town, I think, was 79% of the people got the measles naturally. Again, this was in 1931, no vaccine until 1963. So we're decades from a measles vaccine. That when there's a certain threshold of people get measles, naturally, because that's all there was, that the amount of measles in that population goes down. So this is, the herd immunity concept came from that 1931 study, applied to naturally acquired infections. So they made this massive leap of faith to say, well, if it's true of a natural infection, it must be true of vaccine-induced immunity. And that was an assumption that has never actually been proven. That in fact, because the thinking back then was you give one vaccine at one time, you have lifetime immunity. And that was the thinking. Just give one shot, you're good for life. Because that was true of natural acquired infections. If you got the measles, you weren't going to get the measles again, most likely. And if you got the chickenpox like I did, most likely you were not going to get the chickenpox again. There's a shingles question, that's another story, but that was the general thinking. So they made an assumption, it was just an assumption, because the assumption was that vaccine immunity was lifelong, just like naturally acquired infection, which isn't true. Most, the antibody stimulation typically wears there from 2-3 years, sometimes it'll go as long as 10, typically. And we have another problem. The reason herd immunity is impossible, completely impossible from vaccination, is one, vaccine immunity is temporary. We call that secondary failure. They just wear off. The other issue is primary failure, is that 5 to 15% of the population are called low responders, meaning they never develop antibody. You give them a vaccine and they never develop antibodies. So you have primary failure. Some people don't generate antibodies from a vaccine. And you have secondary failure, which is simply vaccines wear off. So, and we have this all over the literature. We have populations vaccinated 99%, and they still have outbreaks in a 99% population. We see this with pertussis, whooping cough. Almost all the cases are in vaccinated people. They don't like to publish that, but almost all these cases and outbreaks are in fully vaccinated people. So that's another issue. So herd immunity is real, but only from naturally acquired infection. It's impossible it's statistically impossible from vaccine-induced immunity. And so that's, a bit of a concern. And then, on smallpox, yes. The famous case was Leicester, England. Leicester, England was getting decimated with smallpox. And the guy in charge of public health in Leicester, England, was a physician. And he said, you know what, let's just see what happens and stop vaccinating the population for smallpox. And let's just quarantine the people who are sick. And they became the model county in England for the least deaths, least cases of smallpox. They stopped vaccinating and they used quarantine of actively sick people. And then once they realized it, well, let's look at this data on smallpox. Anytime the most intensively vaccinated populations had the most cases and the most deaths, and the populations that had the least vaccinations and just used quarantine had the least cases and the least deaths. And it flipped. So folks who, places like Leicester were massively vaccinated, stopped vaccinating, had better outcomes. And that was true across the board. So smallpox the vaccine had nothing to do with the elimination of the disease, which is true in terms of mortality for all the other vaccines.
Well, I would strongly disagree with you.
Okay.
Smallpox was eliminated with the vaccine. Now, that's the only viral disease, that has actually been eliminated. But if it was not for the vaccine, we'd still be dealing with smallpox. Smallpox has disappeared from the planet. It exists in freezers in Bethesda and probably St. Petersburg. But that's it. Also, polio. Polio was 3 strains of polio. 2 of those strains have been eliminated from the planet. There's 1 strain that's still here, and as I mentioned last time, it's in, I think, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Excuse me?
New York.
New York too?
From an unvaccinated population.
Right. All right, so.
Because it goes into drinking water and people
Mhm. But there's still 1 strain of polio that's around. 2 of them have been eliminated. Smallpox was a problem for over 10,000 years in the human population. It was only with extensive vaccination that it was eliminated. I would also disagree with you that herd immunity cannot be accomplished with vaccination. That doesn't make any sense. You've got the antigen, the antibody, the antigen neutralizing antibodies, the viral neutralizing antibodies. All, I explained this, I'm sorry, Mark, in my last lecture. The immune system is not designed to produce permanent antibody neutralizing antibodies. Your immune system is designed that's temporary for natural infections and immunization. If you think about it, we are exposed to thousands or millions of antigens. If those antibodies were in your blood system, you'd be just loaded with immunoglobulins and you'd cease to function. In fact, there's a study, recent suggestion now, that one of the problems with aging is too many antibodies stick around. So you're designed, the immune system is designed that the neutralizing antibodies are supposed to be temporary. Now, different viruses and different bacteria, that lifetime is different. It's not understood why that happens. There are some antigens, some pathogens that the neutralizing antibodies disappear very quickly. I suspect those are the ones that are most likely to have mimicking responses. And that's why you get rid of them fast, because you don't want them to hang around. like COVID. So that's one of the reasons I believe that the COVID neutralizing antibodies disappear quite quickly. Now, what I explained last time, what doesn't disappear quickly is the cells that produce this, the memory cells. That's why immunization works. Now, the immune system is actually not designed to prevent you from getting infection. That's only temporary. What lasts much longer is it prevents the progression of the disease once you do get infected. So, I explained last time, when you're infected with the disease, it's like a race. The pathogen starts if you're going down a football field, the pathogen starts at the end zone, one end zone, you start, and whoever gets to the next end zone wins.
Right.
So if the pathogen gets there fast, you're out of luck. And that's what happens with people who had HIV and their immune system was destroyed. You can give them antibiotics up to the gazoozlum, and it doesn't work if you haven't got an immune system. So what vaccinations do is they let you start at the 50-yard line. So it gives you a head start. But before it kicks in, you have to be infected. So the neutralizing antibodies are temporary. That's how the immune system works. And you're right, the way the immune system works is it detects infected cells. And then it's wipe out the cells, let God sort out what's left afterwards. That's how the immune system is designed. And vaccination takes account of that. Now, I would have other issues with you, where you said that you had talked to physicians that immunizing babies was mostly, they had absolutely no effect. I would like to see the data on that. I trust you that somebody told you that, but just because somebody who identified themselves as a pediatrician told you that, or an immunologist, I don't know that that's true. I would suspect that's not true, that if actually somebody measured neutralizing antibodies in an infant that was 14 months old, they would find neutralizing antibodies. I don't believe that that's the case. So I think that's that. Also, as I explained, you talked about COVID and long-term COVID and vaccinations with the mRNA hanging around and producing more problems with the vaccine. Now, first of all, I read that paper. Did you?
I did.
Okay, I downloaded it. Now, one of the things that I got, this was a paper, it was not published, so it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. This is a paper that just was put on a site on the web where this is some researchers didn't do this 10 years ago, but now it's more common that you, as soon as you get something out of the lab, you stick it on the web. And unfortunately, I think there's a problem with that because everybody gets to read it, and it's really designed that experts get to read it and then respond before you submit it to a publication. At any rate, the message that I got out of reading that paper is that the problems or the side effects of the COVID vaccine were essentially almost identical to the side effects of long COVID.
Right.
That's the message I got. The message, now, what they did do, and you're correct, is they said, well, we had we detected long-term spike protein. That struck me as, well, if that was the case, that's important. Now, it's more important than just COVID, because if the mRNA that produced that protein lingered for such a long time, that's much more important than vaccines. That would upset or change molecular biology completely.
Exactly.
because molecular biologists view this mRNA, the code for the protein, as far as we know, in all cases before this, the lifetime is limited. That's because in the serum and all over the body there are proteins called mRNAs that destroy that. So messenger RNA, every time before this particular study, nobody detected mRNA lasting long. So if this was correct, this would be way more important than just the study here.
For sure.
Now, all remember Carl Sagan. Everybody remember who Carl Sagan was? Well, Carl Sagan said if you have really dramatic results, what you need is dramatic evidence, lots of dramatic evidence to do that. So I looked at this paper and said, what's the evidence that they have? And the evidence, they did not isolate this protein. They detected it by what's called an immunoassay. Well, the immunoassay, what the immunoassay does is it detects epitopes that are on the protein. The problem is, and they didn't do a very fundamental control that they should have done in this paper. The problem is, and we don't have time to talk about this, but antibodies make antibodies to other antibodies. And it's quite possible that what this assay was detecting was not a spike protein, but an antibody that had a combining site that was like the epitope on a spike protein. That was something called the yearning network theory, which was popular in the 1960s.
All right, I'm gonna step in here before we evolve into a super scientific debate.
Well,
But it's okay.
So we did. So the point is, they didn't do the proper controls to actually demonstrate that they were detecting what they thought they were detecting. That's important. And I don't know whether they said put the reviewer, if I were reviewing the paper, I would say, hey, you gotta do this. And so it's not all clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so let me do this, because time is starting to get limited, or is limited, or past the limits, or something, outer limits. Let's see if people here have some questions for these two very knowledgeable and distinguished, and not necessarily fully in agreement. Raise your hand so I can give you microphones. Who's got it?
I'll just do it real quick, I believe. I thank you both. You're getting both sides of everything. What's important is what we get. The problem is, as you said, you get the mainstream a lot, you're not getting everything. I've read alternative for years. That's where I find out about all this stuff. And that is where we're at. It's up to us. Whether it's the government that we don't like what's going on, we've got to tell them what to do. And the other thing to it, the whole thing, at least the last few generations, it's down to the bottom line, which is financial. Thank you very much, and thank you for what you did, Boo.
Thank you.
Two physicians told me that the best immunity against new COVID outbreaks is that you have the immunizations and then you get breakthrough COVID. In my case, it was Omicron. And they felt that two of them thought that having both experiences was the best preventative of future serious instances of COVID. And I'm wondering what y'all think about that.
I don't know. Like I said, when you get, I suspect why he said that is when you get the COVID inoculation, you're only making or responding and learning about the spike protein. That's only one part of the virus. But there are lots of proteins in the virus. So when you get a natural infection, you're making a lot more proteins, a lot more antibodies to different aspects of the virus. Now, those antibodies are not going to be viral neutralizing antibodies, but they will protect you from an infection. So I suspect that that's what they were talking about, is the fact that you would be, once you got infected, you would have additional protection, not from the spike protein, so it's not going to keep you from getting infected, but it very well might keep you from getting sicker and being hospitalized or whatever. So I suspect that's what he was talking about.
And that would be consistent with the rest of what he said, which is that he had seen fewer instances of people getting COVID. He had seen fewer instances of people getting COVID after they got it, but also they were getting less sick.
Right.
And he saw no deaths in his practice, which was very different than what he was seeing before the immunizations came out. So if you went with the cost-benefit, risk-benefit analysis, it was preventing serious instances of COVID, although it wasn't necessarily a guarantee that you were not going to get it.
Exactly. That's what vaccination, even with the, that's a problem we get to, but that's a problem with the influenza vaccines. Most people, not most, but a lot of people say influenza, you know, it didn't help. I got infected right away anyway, right after I got inoculated. That's quite true. It's the influenza vaccine does not necessarily prevent you from being infected, but it does help after you're infected. It helps you get over the infection quicker, and the quicker you get over that infection, the less chance you're going to have of complications. Now, complications, many people say influenza, a cold. That's true for a lot of people. But as you get older, and if you have other problems like asthma or diabetes, influenza can be a real problem. Last year, there were 17,000 deaths that were attributed to influenza. Now, I had a cousin just before the COVID outbreak. He was 2 years older than me at the time. I guess he was 72 or something. He contracted influenza, went to the ER, went, all right, you got influenza, you know, take it easy, push it back. Came back the next day and he was dead within 36 hours from the first diagnosis. So for some people, influenza can be life-ending, life-threatening. On the other hand, influenza is also, Guillain-Barré syndrome is actually much more common with influenza than people thought. And it's also much more common with influenza vaccinations. Like I said, most of the problems, the risk that you run with the vaccination tend to be so similar, if not identical, to the serious side effects of these diseases that most people can, you know, brush off as not a problem. Now, it turns out that actually getting vaccinated actually lessens the risk of the side effect, and it does that because I think the side effects are associated with how long you've got the active disease. So if you clear the disease within 5 days, it's different than if you got 3 weeks of it. And so if you have influenza for 3 weeks, well, you're much more likely to get these serious side effects.
Dr. Beta, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, for sure. in countries where they vaccinated less against COVID, they had less COVID. And we had the most intensively vaccinated population in the world. We had the highest COVID vaccine utilization and had the most COVID deaths by far per capita. So that's just data. You can make your own conclusion about that. But in countries where the vaccination rate for COVID was 2 or 3%, they had a small fraction of the number of COVID deaths. So with any infection, it's very rare, I'm not saying it's impossible, it's very rare for folks who have good nutrition to die of any infection of any kind for any reason. It happens, but it's way less likely. So there's this whole thing that gets ignored. This got ignored in COVID because it was all about the vaccine. You only get to go back to your normal life if you get vaccinated. They scare the heck out of people. And oh, if you want to see your family again, go get the vaccine. This fear campaign is unbelievable, based on no data. Masking, distancing, lockdowns, closing churches, closing small. This was not one shred of evidence supported any of that. And now we know, because now we have lots of studies, that it did a lot more harm than good. So natural immunity is real. And what we see is with the COVID, the risk benefit, just looking at a lot of the studies that have been done on this, it appears that targeted protection of vulnerable populations, rather than telling everybody you got this shot, would have made sense. So they did in Sweden. They didn't close down anything. So businesses were open, churches were open, people were congregating all the time, no masks. They had way better outcomes than populations that did all that nonsense. Don't go any near anybody, stay away from me, 6 feet, which was made up. Wear a mask, that was made up. There's no data supports it. So the countries that didn't do those things did better than we did, with a very intensively vaccinated population. So if you look at population label, we call epidemiological data, it's pretty clear that you have the worst outcomes with higher vaccine uptake in general. That said, I'm a big fan of informed consent. If a person's like, hey, I feel like I'm at risk, I want to go get a COVID shot, great, go to do whatever you want. But let's not pretend that we have great data on safety or efficacy that was supported for the entire population. So my approach to that, and our philosophy at the clinic and in the school, is nature first, drugs last. Nature first, drugs last. Doesn't mean drugs are bad. Drugs aren't bad. Drugs are wonderful. They're just massively overused. Massively. We have 4.2% of the world's population. We consume 50% of the world's pharmaceutical drugs. Think about that. 4% of the population eating half the world's pharma drugs. And we have the worst health outcomes of any advanced nation. We're at the bottom of the heap. Our best outcome, looking at the WHO, which I have other problems with, is we rank at best 37 in the world in health outcomes. So we've replaced these, generally, usually benign, short-term, self-limiting infections with a tidal wave of chronic disease, right? We have a real epidemic in this country. It's not COVID. And the evidence strongly suggests that we prolong the epidemic with vaccinating the whole population. You don't deal with epidemics that way. You don't vaccinate in the middle of a pandemic or an epidemic. Anyway, it's another discussion. But we've traded these short-term self-limiting infections with an avalanche of chronic disease. And I'm very concerned about that. So certainly in your case, do whatever makes sense to you, but having seen a lot of people for a lot of years, there are natural solutions to whatever your issue was, sickness, whatever it is, that are the vast majority of the time very effective and much safer than a pharmaceutical intervention. And the last thing I didn't get to from before is the most valid metric when you look at vaccinations is which kids are healthier. Are the vaccinated kids healthier, or are the unvaccinated kids healthier? We've found so far over 120 studies answering, because that's really ultimately We could argue philosophically and immunology. It's very interesting. It's wonderful. But the bottom line is, what's the outcomes? Are the vaccines making kids healthier or not? That's what I want to know. If I'm going to vaccinate my kid, for example, or grandkid, are they working? Are the outcomes better? And we now have 120 studies. It's not my opinion. It's in the literature that the sickest children in human history at any time are American fully vaccinated kids. They get 2/3 fewer vaccines in Europe, the kids are healthier. And they don't have a massive explosion in deaths from the vaccinated diseases. So the sickest kids in history are American fully vaccinated kids. Compared to their unvaccinated counterparts, they are way, way sicker. They have more neurodevelopmental problems, asthma, eczema, ear infections. The list is very, very long. And now, so at the end of the day, if you're going by data, the best outcomes are in unvaccinated kids. And that's not my opinion. That's 120 published studies. I'm passing a book around that has those studies in it. So that's just the facts. And we could theorize, ooh, let's get this antibody, that antibody. Great, fine. But let's look at outcomes. Not inputs, but outputs. What are the outputs? And the outputs are that our current vaccine schedule, which is bigger than any other country, does a lot more harm.
Well, I would strongly disagree with that. What we have to do is look at 150 years ago, before vaccines. Most parents would have 5, 6, 7 children. The reason is half of them wouldn't survive. Now, when children don't, it's unusual for your child not to make the first birthday or second birthday.
Well, that was nutrition, sanitation.
Not just nutrition, no. That was all over the planet. That was the case in royal families, where the royal family was, maybe most of the country wasn't eating right, but the royal family, they were fully neutral. Nutrition was not a problem. That was princes and kings, they suffered the consequences also. So if you just look at history, again with smallpox, whole populations would be devastated. You had this area, Native Americans, populations, tribes, not unusual, 60% or 30 to 50% of the tribe would be lost within a year from a smallpox epidemic. No. Now,
That's talking chronic disease.
one other thing. The fact is, yes, there are risks if you're vaccinated, but if you're living in a population where 95% of your neighbors are vaccinated, if you don't get a vaccination, you're okay because of herd immunity. So if you don't get vaccinated, you're not taking that risk. And so yes, you're going to be a little healthier than individuals who were vaccinated. But if everybody made that decision, then you would not have herd immunity and you would have real problems. That's what's happened. It's happening right now in Texas, West Texas. That's why you have the outbreak of measles. Measles, and it didn't just happen anywhere, it happened in the county with the lowest vaccination rate. So vaccinations to measles in that county are, I think, 86% or something. Herd immunity requires at least 95% people who are immune for measles. Different diseases are different. Measles is one of the most infectious diseases. Other diseases
With very low mortality.
Well, I don't know about the mortality. I mean, there's already deaths.
This last week of measles in Texas who was unvaccinated.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
how many vaccinated kids for measles are dying compared to the percentage of unvaccinated kids?
Well, in most cases, we have to differentiate between cases and deaths. And
Okay, a kid died in Texas. who was
understandable. Yeah, there were 16 measles outbreaks last year. And so, the vast majority of those cases were unvaccinated kids, fully vaccinated kids. So
You're
it
saying
gets a little
the
tricky.
majority were fully vaccinated kids?
Yes.
Do you have a study for that?
Case,
Dr.
yes,
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
for sure. That's historical.
I mean, you talked about COVID, last time I put the chart up again, but most of the people with the second wave of COVID, over 99% of the deaths were unvaccinated people. It was a huge difference. So vaccination did not necessarily protect individuals from being infected, but it did protect people from actually being killed.
At low cost.
All right, we're not gonna resolve this. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming today. This was really enlightening and thought-provoking. Super appreciated. I'm sure you have some reference material that people can look at if they want to learn more on the vaccine safety side, and you can corner Alan almost anywhere in the community, and he has an opinion or two to share. Before we break up for the day, want to let you know that in March, on March 28th, of course, the next Hilltop University Web Walls program, we will be talking about